In today's show, we're going to take a deeper dive into meal timing, exercise timing, feeding, fasting, window compression, and timing of your nutrients, that is dietary supplements, so as to maximize circadian rhythm health and optimization. I came across this fascinating, really deep exploration into this whole field of circadian medicine. So this is a term that is actually being thrown around jargon, by scientists and researchers. And I want to just break down this sort of complex paper here and share with you some images that I came across that help me better understand this information so that I'm working one-on-one with clients who have sleep issues, who have hormone dysfunction, who have chronic autoimmune issues, allergies, asthma, atopy, things like that, where we can really optimize the timing of different dietary supplements, other interventions such as fasting, meals, exercise, and even light exposure. Even we're going to talk about temperature exposure because your core body temperature fluctuates on a diurnal rhythm throughout the day. So we're going to talk about all these things with the bigger context of optimizing circadian rhythm health and function. And again, as this paper talks about, the foundations of circadian medicine. Now, this is really important, but unfortunately, and again, this paper makes the case, and I'm going to say this hopefully not too many times, but a few times for the purposes of indelibly inking this into your mind, that we really need to approach any ailment or dis-ease that we are dealing with, whether it's high blood pressure, whether it's cardiovascular risk factors, whether it's optimizing the immune system response to a COVID-19 vaccination, which is, I'm going to share with you some new research that is actually looking at this, looking at people's sleep habits and their chronotype to see if there's a sort of commensurate association with the immunologic response after an immunization. Isn't that quite interesting? Because we know that shift workers and people that are working in high stress environments in the hospital, one particular study, I'll share this with you on the screen, it's on the show notes, actually found that people who had poor sleep were more likely to even get infected with this particular pathogen, that is SARS-CoV-2. So basically, every ailment we can think of is influenced by our body's circadian clock system. And a dysregulated circadian clock system causes dis-ease at the cellular level and dysfunction within metabolic homeostasis and all sorts of different gene signaling from metabolites and much more. Between 20 and 50% of your genes, protein synthesizing genes and so forth, oscillate on a diurnal rhythm throughout a given day. So if you have alterations in your circadian clock system, you're going to have alterations in your metabolites, which will cause at the cellular level dysfunction, which can manifest over time into organ dysfunction that can lead to a diagnosable disease. Even diseases like Alzheimer's, like neurodegenerative diseases, mood disorders from schizophrenia to bipolar to depression. All of these diseases can be characterized by some sort of circadian rhythm dysfunction. Now, it goes bidirectional, it goes both ways. And this paper, again, does a great job of illustrating this. And you can read this, and I'll link it below. But they say that not only do circadian rhythm disruptions cause, more symptomatic expression in various diseases, but it goes the other way around. Once you have the diagnosed disease, there's a demonstrable change within the circadian clock system. So the scientists say, we don't know what the chicken or the egg is here. Is it the disease that's causing the dysfunction in the circadian rhythms, or is the circadian rhythms causing the disease, or is it a combination of both? Now, because they're inextricably linked and it's impossible to disentangle the clock from the dysfunction, that is, altered circadian rhythms and obesity, or sleep issues and circadian rhythm dysfunction, because they're intertwined, they're impossible to disassociate, we should be approaching the clinical management of any disease, right? Whether we're talking about obesity, high blood pressure, whether we're talking about dementia, Alzheimer's, memory loss, mood disorders, depression, schizophrenia, autoimmunity, allergies, all of these diseases, we also need to consider in the treatment. I want to share with you about 7 different ways that you can optimize your body's circadian clock system and more specifically hone in on nutrient timing with different nutrients, because we cannot disentangle these things. So if you have, say, blood sugar imbalances, I know a lot of U.S. adults, and presumably some of you, have some degree of insulin resistance. Well, if you're taking, say, a supplement like, I don't know, whether it's a drug like metformin, or if you're taking berberine hydrochloride or maybe myo-inositol, you should really focus on taking that in the afternoon and the evening when your blood sugar levels are most erratic. For another example that's very common is people have elevated blood levels of triglycerides and LDL cholesterol, so they're concerned. And they might whimsically take their statin or their fish oil or some other substance to change those blood lipid levels when they remember it. Oh, I'll take it with lunch, or oh, oops, I forgot to take it yesterday, so I'll take it in the morning today. But from a circadian rhythm standpoint, if you want to optimize cardiovascular health, particularly as it relates to lipids, both triglycerides and cholesterol, you should probably consider taking supplements or interventions in the evening time, because lipid synthesis occurs in the evening and while we're sleeping, so that you can get ahead of these different, so that you can match the mechanism of action with the intervention that you're taking with its circadian rhythm involvement. Okay, so likewise, if you have asthma, if you have autoimmunity, maybe you have lupus, maybe you wake up and you have rheumatoid arthritis or MS and your joints are achy and your nervous system is all messed up, then you might want to consider, what are you doing before bed to decrease the inflammatory tone? Because we know that the immune system can be revved up when we're sleeping. It's really active. There's a lot of movement in the lymphatics and the glial lymphatics, and all sorts of different immune cells are quite active, and their cytokine expression is increased when we're sleeping. So if you're not sleeping properly, or if you're getting imbalanced sleep, that can augment that. But you can also think about, well, maybe before I go to bed, I might do some light yoga, do some things, do some breath work, do some things that really calm down the immune system and send the right chemical messengers. Maybe take some probiotics, maybe take some curcuminoids, maybe have garlic with dinner. You see, do these different interventions and focus on the natural products so as to decrease the inflammatory signaling while you're sleeping, and maybe minimize the symptoms that express in the early morning hours or when you get up. So maybe your joints aren't so achy, right? And so it's no secret that when you stay up late and you go out and binge drink, and you have pizza at 2 a.m, and you wake up and you feel like a train ran over you. Your joints are achy. You're tired, right? You're puffy. You're not recovered. Your brain has fog. You have some sort of memory issues. Well, why is that? Because you altered your body's circadian clock system. Yeah, you didn't get the appropriate duration of sleep, but you also probably caused dysbiosis and imbalances in your gut bacteria. Your gut bacteria too oscillate on a circadian rhythm basis, as this paper talks about. So when we screw up the gut clock, when we screw up the microbiome clock, then we're going to augment our immune system. So here we go again, repeating ourselves. It's impossible to disentangle the circadian rhythm from the condition that we want to focus on, whether it's losing weight, whether it's improving our blood sugar levels, whether it's improving our memory, preventing degeneration of our brain, and not developing Alzheimer's and things like that. We cannot disentangle that. And that's why, my friends, circadian medicine is the future. So I want you to start to think about these things as we unpack even more nuances and the practical nuts and bolts here, to think about, okay, what am I trying to achieve here? Is it increased fat loss? Okay, I know that I'm really actually burning fat when I'm sleeping. So if I'm staying up until 2 a.m. to watch Netflix, okay, that's probably not going to help me burn fat. Yeah, you could be in a calorie deficit, but if you're augmenting your circadian clock system and disrupting that, that's going to work against you. So before we continue on, friends, and dive deeper into this research, I just want to welcome you all back. It's Mike Mutzel. As always, I'm grateful that you're here. So we are taking a deeper dive into some biochemistry. Hopefully you enjoy it. If you do, just let me know in the comments below. Do you like these deeper dives? Hit that like button. If you are getting some value, you can, of course, share this with a friend or family. Just send them a text message. Say, hey, check out this in iTunes or YouTube, and send it directly to them. That goes a long way. Also, my friends, what I'll do is link below a link to our page, our sister company, Myoscience. We're going to talk about adrenal thyroid support, talk about DHEA, blood sugar health, and all that. So there's some tools and solutions over at Myoscience. I'm a big fan of using glandulars in the morning, like adrenal and thyroid glandulars like that. Also, testicular extract for men. You can take that at night. So I want to give you just a primer about how to support your circadian clock system by also using glandulars, because here's the thing. As you age, the amplitude or the intensity of your circadian rhythms is attenuated a little bit. So you need to be very vigilant about this if you want to optimize your sleep and really continue to have great restful sleep as you age, because the amplitude and the intensity of your circadian rhythms is a little muted as you age. So I'll just put links below to some solutions. You can use the coupon code podcast at checkout, where we're going to take a deeper dive into that over at myoscience.com. That's MYOXCIENCE.com, myoscience with an X.com. Check it out. Okay. So let's continue on and talk a little bit more about what to do. So you have the big high-level overview. And again, the scientists do a great job in this paper of really, it's more of a call to action with a lot of details to tell practitioners like, hey, look, it's impossible to disentangle circadian rhythms from any disease that we can think about, from diabetes to heart disease to autoimmunity to depression to Alzheimer's. Okay. So with that in mind, then we need to be custom tailoring chrononutrition, feeding fasting windows, exercise timing, dietary supplements, pharmaceuticals, even oncologic medications. In fact, the field that is most ahead and most aligned at this point in time with circadian medicine is the field of oncology, because I'm not an oncologist, obviously, and I'm not pretending to be, but I've read some of their journals, and basically individuals' chronotype can be assessed clinically in a cancer management type setting, and then they can therapeutically time the pharmaceuticals, whether it's radiation treatments or different chemotherapy treatments, so as to maximize the therapeutic efficacy and minimize the immune system's or the antioxidant function capacity, glutathione capacity's involvement. Because if you have high levels of, say, glutathione or antioxidant enzymes, for example, in the evening time or early morning, then that would be a bad time to administer chemotherapy. So you might want to do it, say, at 10 or 11 a.m., kind of late, mid-morning, right? So that has been going on for the past decade, but yet a lot of people don't realize this. When you talk to folks about taking supplements, let's just use the example of N-acetylcysteine, the amino acid precursor to make the rate limiting, to participate in giving the raw materials to make the rate limiting amino acid that's involved in glutathione synthesis, that is cysteine. A lot of people might think to take it in the morning, or they take it with lunch. But you really want to take any antioxidant towards the evening or before bed, because that's when antioxidants are going to be most beneficial. In fact, I would not recommend taking antioxidants during the day. Again, this is extrapolating from animal model studies. We don't have direct human studies, but antioxidants during the day are, I would not suggest that. Essentially, when your metabolic rate, when your cellular machinery, mitochondrial function is sort of revved up, you're moving around during the day, you're moving your muscles, you're eating calories and things like that, you do not want to take antioxidants during that time. It's more when you're quiet, calm, relaxed, and sleeping. Okay, so that's just one little takeaway from this. And this might be why, friends, when you see the studies on, say, vitamin C, or you see the studies on vitamin E, and it was administered to clinicians would give this to the study participants, and the scientists would say, see, there's no data to show that antioxidants are helpful. Well, what if it was just the timing of when those antioxidants were administered was mismatched with the chrononutrition or their circadian rhythm? So we need to always think about that. And then when you're reading studies, we're hearing about, well, this intervention didn't work, or that thing didn't work. There's more to the story. When was it administered and for whom? So that's important to understand. And before we go on, I do just want to emphasize that unfortunately, there's no real objective way that's accessible commercially to sort of quantify or ascertain our chronotype at this point in time. I mentioned the oncologist might be using this in a clinical setting. It's not like you can go to your lab and say, hey, tell me my chronotype. But we generally do have a good idea. You're a morning person or a night owl, right? That, people will say, gosh, you stay up to 2 a.m. and you're reading it, you're doing your taxes. Like, you're crazy. You're like, no, it's just me. So, we need to have an honest evaluation about our chronotype. But when you're younger, generally your chronotype shifts a little bit later. So most kids, that's more in the teenagers, but children can be, their chronotype is a little bit earlier. They'll get up sometimes, your kid gets up at 6 a.m. You're like, gosh, can they just sleep in for gosh sakes, right? And then as they go through puberty, their chronotype shifts a little bit, and then it sort of reverts back. And so this is malleable, but there's a lot of heterogeneity within the population. So, and that probably serves some teleologic or evolutionary advantage, right? Where, if everyone was an early bird and maybe there was a bear or a wolf or some predators or some intruders from another tribe, that would be disadvantageous, right? You'd want some people that would naturally want to go to bed a little bit later, and then you'd have early risers. So there's a lot of overlap in who's watching out for the communities. And so anyway, that's interesting, but we do need to know and recognize that people that do the work, the shift work or graveyard shift, that can cause a lot of imbalances. And again, this data is very clear. Individuals who work the graveyard, work the night shift, generally have on a epidemiologic level higher occurrences of cancer, metabolic disease, obesity, and things of the sort. So we need to be aware of that, and there's tools to mitigate that. We've done a lot of videos on that before, but if you've missed those, what you want to do is completely invert your rhythm. If you're like, look, I like working the night shift. I know people that are ER doctors, people that are nurses on oncology ward, things like that, where they have to work nights. Like it's just part of how the world works. So what do? Well, you need to totally invert your rhythm. Okay. So your morning is going to be everyone else's evening. So you want to get that sunlight. You want to get up at, 5 p.m. or something. Try to get outside, try to get a lot of sun into your retina and things like that. Kickstart your day. And then as you're coming home from work, finish up, high stress things and be very vigilant about avoiding that early morning sun exposure, because you don't want to confuse your body. You want to be very dark, blackout curtains, shades, night shades, all of that. And try to be consistent with that, even on days when you're not working. The inverse is true for most of us who work sort of a classic 9-to-5 type job. When you get up in the morning, light is a big sort of Zeitgeber of your circadian clock system. It influences the central chiasmatic nucleus within the hypothalamus. But what we also need to recognize is there's peripheral oscillators. And so this is where cold exposure, this is where food, this is where heat, this is also where meal timing, exercise, all of those things influence the circadian clock system on the peripheral level and also on the central level. So it's not just light, it's meal timing. So maybe let's start there, then we'll finish off with the supplements. So let's say you struggle with sleep. A lot of people do. In fact, there was a study here I want to share with you about after menopause. It turns out that when women go through menopause, the circadian clock system has some challenges. And so there's a really good article here titled, I want to share this with you, Postmenopausal Women Exhibit Loss of Circadian Robustness and an Increase in Sleep Abnormalities Compared with Premenopausal Women. So that shift in the hormones as women transition into perimenopause and postmenopause is also linked and associated with a reduction in the amplitude of the circadian rhythms. And so what does that mean? That means peri and postmenopausal women need to be very vigilant about light exposure, meal timing, morning cold exposure, evening heat exposure. So that's going to be very important. And exercise timing as well. Exercise timing helps to entrain the peripheral and the central circadian clock system. What I mean by that is being consistent when you exercise. Okay, so if you can't sleep, you need to be very consistent with all of these things. When you get up in the morning, the light that you're exposed to in the morning and the midday and in the evening, and then when you eat, when you fast, and when you exercise. So that can help influence everything. And this is more important so if you look at the bell curve, young people and old people, really important because the circadian rhythm is actually a lot more sensitive for children from a light perspective. So cell phones and iPads and televisions and artificial lights is much more problematic for young children than it is for people in their 30s and 40s. But as you just heard, in peri and postmenopausal women and also older men, the amplitude and the intensity of the circadian rhythms from a genetic level and gene transcription level is muted as you age. So that means you need to be even more vigilant about light, about morning cold exposure, evening heat exposure, meal timing, exercise timing, and fasting timing. Okay. So really important stuff, friends. So morning light, midday light, even if it's cloudy out, you have to get outside. This is like the vitamin for your circadian clock system. Just think about it like that. It sounds stupid, but you have to do this, my friends. Look, I know so many people who just literally, they go from their cozy little home, into the car, into the office, and never see the sun. Terrible idea. You need to get outside. You need to go do some breath work on your porch. If you live in a condo, whatever, in Manhattan, get outside literally and try to go and get your eyes and your face just 5 minutes exposed to the sun, okay? Even if it's cloudy, just get some bright light in your eyes. And also remember, around noontime, just make it a priority. You have to do this. It's like paying your taxes. You have to do this. This is a non-negotiable. I will tell you that after 15 years of coaching clients, I spend more time emphasizing this. People want to split hairs on, well, how much berberine should I take? Should I oscillate berberine and metformin? How much weight do I need to lift? How much protein do I need? We spend all this time on that. And I'm like, look, before you even talk about that, we need to address your circadian clock system. We need to make sure that you're being very consistent with your exercise timing, that you're not, having caffeine late in the day, that you're not on the iPad or the computer watching a lot of television at night, because all this splitting hairs over 50 milligrams of protein versus 75, give me a break, okay? That trumps everything. Really important. So we've gotten our sunlight out of the way. We've got a little movement in the morning. So if we want to optimize fat oxidation, potentially from a circadian rhythm standpoint, you may, and this is, again, maybe, I'm not saying a guarantee, okay? Just understand, you might be able to oxidize a little bit more fatty acids if you do aerobics or cardiovascular-based exercise or even HIIT training in the morning. The challenge with that, my friends, is from a circadian rhythm standpoint, you are a little bit more catabolic in the morning because of the lower androgens and higher levels of, cortisol and noradrenaline. So from a weightlifting perspective, you might be a little bit more favorable from an anabolic hypertrophy standpoint, training around noontime or after work, between 3 and 6. However, I think consistency trumps all. Okay, so if the morning time is the only time that you can train and you can consistently dedicate time to exercise, in the morning, please do that. Do not switch it because you heard that you might be able to maybe theoretically be more of in an anabolic window if you train in the afternoon. Okay, so just understand and recognize that. Consistency is key. Your body starts to anticipate exercise. So you got to train at the same time every day. I train between 11 and 1. That's it. Usually I'm starting to work out around noon. It breaks up the day. It's a nice way I like to eat a little bit before I train and exercise, but I do take my dog for a walk at about 6 in the morning. I bike my daughter to school. So I get a little bit of movement in, and that helps, focus through the day. But I want to really, just personally, I have the ability, lifting from home and working from home and so forth on most days, hitting the gym at noon. Okay. That's just me. I used to love afternoons as well, but I found myself wanting to have coffee before I would work out. So I'd have coffee or caffeine at 3 o'clock, then I'd work out at 5, and then I had sleep issues. And so, another thing you need to understand is the half-life of caffeine. I think it's something in between, 8.5 to 10 hours, depending upon the person's genetics. How they're CYP1A2, I believe, or 3A4, I can't remember. But so you don't want to have a lot of caffeine after 12, okay? In fact, if you have any sleep issues whatsoever, I would say 11 a.m. should be your cutoff time for caffeine, okay? So that's important. Now let's talk about fasting and feeding, because this is another peripheral and central regulator and influencer of your body's circadian clock system. So if you have sleep issues, if you have weight issues, if you have blood pressure issues, if you have immune issues, or you have blood sugar issue, metabolic issues, you should be considering early time restricted feeding. Okay. We know that from a circadian rhythm standpoint, lunchtime is really a good time to start feeding between, say, 11 and 1. Because, again, from an enzymatic standpoint, from a gastrointestinal motility standpoint, the peristalsis, all the movement and the juices, the bile acid, the hydrochloric acid, all of these things are primed in the middle part of the day, which is why I'm not a huge fan of the old school style of intermittent fasting where you fast all day and have a big meal like 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night. Terrible way to go about it, because again, from a gut standpoint, motility, digestion, and blood sugar health standpoint, you're more insulin resistant as the day goes on. So it doesn't make sense to just backload a bunch of calories when you're already insulin resistant throughout the day. Okay. So from a circadian rhythm standpoint, again, this can help with your sleep. This can help with your hormones. This can help with all sorts of other aspects. Eating earlier in the day and starting your fast earlier. A lot of people say, well, intermittent fasting is stressful because it raises cortisol. Well, if you've eaten and cut off your feeding window at 4 or 5, you're going to actually support cortisol circadian rhythm standpoint and the cortisol awakening response and circadian rhythm health. You're not going to negatively impact that. So that's important to understand. And since we're talking about cortisol, one thing that I have changed in my sort of recommendations is I used to administer or take DHEA, the hormone that's made by your adrenal glands. We've talked about this in many other podcasts. DHEA is a supplement. It's over the counter. Unfortunately, you have to get a prescription from a doctor if you live in Canada or Australia. But here in the United States and in other countries, it's an over-the-counter dietary supplement. I used to take that in the morning and I found benefit, but I now dose this at night. And the reason why I'm doing that is DHEA has been shown to sort of antagonize cortisol's synthesis and expression. And just from a circadian rhythm standpoint, I thought, you know what? And again, this is more animal model data, okay? Various studies have dosed both DHEA in the morning and night, or vice versa, one or the other. So you're probably okay doing it when you remember. But I have actually found that sleep might be just a little bit better taking it before bed. So that's just what I do. But if you're one of these people that if you tweak one little thing, you're up all night. I don't want to screw up your sleep. So try this on the weekend. If you take DHEA, you can try taking it before bed. A general rule of thumb, so don't hold me to this, but generally speaking, you can start roughly, test your blood levels, DHA sulfate levels, 10 milligrams per decade of life. So if you're 40 years old, you could take 40 milligrams. Women, it's about 25% of that. So 75% less. Okay. So if you're a woman in your 40s, you can start around 10 milligrams. If you're in your 60s, it can be 15, 20 in that ballpark. Okay. So we have other videos on that. But now let's talk a little bit and finish off more about metabolic health. We've talked about many times. About 83% of adults here in the US have some sort of metabolic dysfunction, insulin resistance, blood sugar imbalances. Okay. So if you're trying to support metabolic health, it makes a little bit more sense to take dietary supplements or interventions. Walking is an intervention that can improve blood sugar regulation. Berberine hydrochloride is another intervention. Myo-inositol, there's chromium, there's cinnamon. These are all things that you'd want to take more in the afternoon or the evening, because it turns out that that's where most people tend to have more erratic blood sugar levels and more oscillations, more variability. Remember, we want to squash that variability. We don't want ebbs and flows, because the ebbs and flows in glucose cause a commensurate ebb and flow in insulin. And it's the hyperinsulinemia that can be problematic for developing coronary artery disease, for causing high blood pressure, for maybe insulin resistance in the brain, and much more. So if you've heard on this podcast for others, and we've talked, I'm a huge fan of berberine hydrochloride. It's very effective. People are like, well, when do I take it? Do I take it with lunch? Do I do that? Look, take it whenever you want. It's your body, your life, okay? But I do recommend using it either to kickstart a fast, like in the morning, or also in the evening. Essentially, you're kickstarting your fast when you stop dinner, right? I know it sounds weird because you're just eating, but that should be the start of your overnight fast. And so that's when you can take it as well. And it makes a little bit more sense to use it in the evening or also at night, because of the fact that, again, from a circadian rhythm standpoint, that's when your blood sugar levels are most wonky. So there's a few other things that we do want to talk about, and that is light hygiene. Light hygiene is part of the equation. We've talked a lot about morning light and how we know light is very important. But on the other end of the spectrum, remember, it's a diurnal rhythm. So light, what comes up must come down in a kind of a sine equation. Well, if we think about darkness is as much of a cue for the other half of your circadian rhythm as is light, okay, in the morning part. So very important that you start to unwind at night and adhere to proper light hygiene. So that means dimming screens if you have to be on them, using a pair of blue light blocking glasses. I wear these all the time from Blue Block, so I'll put links below. An amazing company. They actually test their lenses. Of course, it's best to just avoid artificial light and LED emitting devices. I know that's not possible for some people, but do the best you can to minimize that, and do the best you can to go outside and go for a walk. Remember, one way to decrease your blood sugar levels that are more volatile in the afternoon, evening, is to simply go for a walk. And that can help create more sleep pressure, build up that adenosine in the brain. But wearing the blue light filtering glasses can also help as well. So darkness is Zeitgeber. It's a cue. It helps to entrain the clock. Now, darkness, again, as we talked about the bell-shaped curve where people are in terms of their intensity of the circadian rhythms, children and more elderly people past middle age need to be more vigilant about artificial light exposure compared to, say, a 20 or 30 something, okay? Because of the fact that there's the amplitude and the frequency of the rhythms, it becomes muted with time, with age. And of course, with children, their eyes are such that they're just more sensitive to it. So there was a study going back to 2016, or I think it was 2016, that found that e-reader devices, when given to children, had a much greater suppression on their evening melatonin release compared to, I think these were like college kids. So they looked at kids under 10 and then kids over 20. Massive difference. And so what the scientists speculate is due to the shape of the developing eye, that children are much more sensitive to the exposure of the artificial light and the blue light. So again, I see kids on iPhones and some kids that I know sleep with their iPads, which is absolutely terrible, poor hygiene. Not a good thing for your developing child and their chronobiology and chrononutrition. So what about vitamins and minerals? I mean, this is something to consider. From a circadian rhythm standpoint, it seems that since vitamins are cofactors involved in intermediary metabolism, it makes a little bit more sense to take them, I would say, during lunchtime and dinner time, or during major meals, as so with minerals as well. But I can't find any hard data to show that, well, if you take folate after this time, it's going to do this. Most of these processes where B vitamins are cofactors are involved in digestion and processing of energy, which is happening mostly during the day. So that, to me, makes a little bit more sense. Let's talk about using temperature as a way to sort of entrain or influence the circadian rhythms. Well, as I mentioned earlier, your core temperature is lowest in the morning, and then it starts to progressively increase as the day goes on. So you might say, well, Mike, should I sauna in the morning or should I sauna in the evening? I'm a bigger fan of deliberate cold exposure in the morning. And again, this is just another peripheral cue that can help you to maintain that high amplitude of your circadian rhythm, to really ensure that your clocks and your genes that are expressing when they should be have ample amplitude of the expression. So cold exposure in the morning, being deliberate about that, and using a sauna or a hot shower, a bath, a hot tub in the evening. First of all, it's relaxing. It can help move blood around. It can probably help lower the post-meal glucose levels. Going in the sauna or a hot shower or hot bath, a hot tub, all those things can be helpful. So, and then it's relaxing. It can help you fall asleep. So again, these are just things that we probably naturally do, and we have a westernized way to sort of quantify and explain, how these things are working. But in conclusion, overwhelming research suggests that the circadian clock system impacts health, and the timing of nutrition, as well as lifestyle interventions like fasting, should be considered through the lens of the circadian clock system. And this call to action, I think it's very apropos. It's very timely. It's something that we should understand, because as they say in the introduction, this will be as we finish off here in sort of part ways, although the circadian clock system was first elucidated and identified in lower order organisms and so forth in the 1960s, it's rarely considered in the practice of primary care medicine. However, we know that circadian rhythms are ubiquitous and affect almost all biologic functions. Prominent examples include the sleep-wake cycle, fasting-feeding cycles, cognitive performance, glymphatic, which is the lymphatic system in your brain, lymphatic flow, body temperature, insulin sensitivity, glucose metabolism, insulin cell trafficking and activity, hormone secretion, blood pressure, heart rate, kidney function, adipose tissue physiology, and many more processes. So again, when you're taking any supplement or exercise, or whatever it is, think about this fundamental system that is behind the scenes, that is quietly orchestrating and matching your biology with the season, with the time of the day, so as to optimize success for your body. And if you're starting to experience dis-ease, allergies, autoimmunity, joint pain, cognitive decline, hormone issues, infertility, then you need to take extra considerations into light hygiene, temperature control, feeding, fasting windows, so as to maximize the amplitude and properly synchronize your circadian biology with your internal milieu. It's very important. Your gut, your microbiome, everything is influenced by this important system, my friends. It's time that we make circadian medicine part of the future. So as always, I'm grateful that you tuned in to this conversation. Thank you for sharing this video. Thank you for supporting our show sponsor, Myoscience, and we will catch you on a future episode down the road. Have an awesome rest of your day. Bye now.